Hey, welcome to a little video on using type and textures and patterns and layer styles in Photoshop. If you're taking this during the fall semester, it might be political season. I thought we would do a little political button of some kind. Vote for me. Choose a candidate or an issue if you like, or make one up. Doesn't matter. What matters is how you build this. Let's see what I've got here. I've got a couple of different type layers, and these have some effects on them. I've got started off here with just a plain blue circle, and my document in this case was 5 inches by 5 inches, a resolution of 300. I do want that resolution of 300. The document size was somewhat arbitrary. This would be a pretty large political button, but there we go. And let's see, so I started off with just a regular old blue circle. Now I did have a selection going, and just in case I needed the selection later, I saved my selection. There it is. I just called it circle, and so I could load that at any time. And of course, to save a selection, you have the marching ants activated, go to select and do save selection, give it a name, tell it to be in a new channel, make sure that it's the same document that you're in, and you can click OK. But I've already done that, so I'll hit cancel. But just for future reference. Now I put some effects on here. There's a bevel and emboss and a pattern overlay. So let's take a look at that. In order to achieve effects on a given layer, you just double click on that layer and you get this layer style dialog box. Now just by default you get the blending styles, and if you click on one of these topics on the left, you get the controls for that particular style. In this case, bevel and emboss, and I've got a size specified and a soft bevel and emboss going. And let's see, we've got, you can select the opacity, and here you can select the shading. Let's turn these effects on so we can actually see those, and I'll turn the pattern off. We'll talk about that in a moment. This is just the bevel and emboss, and I'll double click on that again, and let's take a look. I liked the fact that you can pull back on the shading area. I don't know if you can see that. I've got that pulled way back in here toward the center of the circle. That's back a little bit too far. Now you can pull this out past the edge of the circle, and this, in effect, changes the angle of your light source, you might say. And in this case, where I'm trying to create the illusion of a little pin or a button, let's see if I can grab that edge. There it is. So to create the illusion of this political button, I like the fact that I can bring my highlight into the image just a little bit, and I think that helps create that illusion of that rounded edge that we might see on this type of a pin or button. So I've done that, and you can affect the size of the emboss, which either reinforces or destroys the illusion that I'm trying to create. And I figured somewhere in here it looked pretty good. You can harden that edge or soften it. I wanted a soft edge to reinforce the illusion of kind of a more round surface, although you can do a similar thing with the depth of the bevel and emboss. And the key thing is to keep in mind what illusion you're trying to create and use these tools to that end. Now, I also put a pattern on here, and there's a couple of default patterns in Photoshop. You can get the little bubbles, or I don't know what this one is. But you can see now this pattern has sort of a rainbow color to it. How come I'm not getting that on here? Well, most of these effects you can choose to blend them in a certain way. I'm blending for luminosity. In other words, it's not blending in the color information, it's just blending in the difference of light and dark on here. Here's what the normal is for that, and of course you can change the opacity up to full opacity, or I can pull back and let that blue show through quite a bit. and I can blend for luminosity. So how did I get these other patterns here? I've got a sort of a drywall texture here that I've put in, but you can see it's a pattern. So we've chosen a basic element to the pattern. Oh, I can scale it too. Let's scale it back and show you. And then that pattern will repeat. So I've got kind of a light and dark area in that existing pattern, and as I zoom in on it or I scale the pattern up, you can tell the little drywall texture on there. I'll show you where we got that in a moment. I've also got a fabric here, and we can scale that at various levels too. And as I scale it down, you can see there's a little bit of a seam there. It's not quite so obvious on this one, but there is a bit of a seam that we find when I scale that. So how did I get these? Let's find out, and I'll put my type layers back on there, which we'll talk about in a moment too. I've got some other images here. There's this pliers image from the previous lesson, and as you can tell, what I did was I selected a piece of that, copied that onto the clipboard, and when you do that, let me select another piece here. I'll just select some of this wood grain, and I'll hold my shift key down, maybe, to get, oh, let me deselect everything first. I'll hold the shift key down, there we go, and we'll get a square selection. Now you can see I've got this dark area in the corner. And I'll copy that onto the clipboard. Now I'll go into Photoshop, and under Edit, we've got something called Define Pattern. And I'll just call that wood floor. And I'll click OK. And then after that, I have on this copy of Photoshop, on my machine at least, I have that as a possible pattern that I can use. When I do pattern overlay, there it is. There's wood floor. And not so bad. I'll scale it down so you can see how it repeats, and I'll put it back to normal. And we'll bump the opacity way up. There we go. There's how it repeats. Oh, so you could have the illusion of a wooden button. Now that might be kind of cool. That would be cool for certain candidates or certain issues, perhaps. And with my pattern, you can see that as I scale it down and we can see the repetition of that pattern, you see that that little dark area that I had in my selection gets repeated and repeated. Or you can scale it up where it's not quite so obvious. Now as you scale it up beyond its own resolution, we have resolution issues, so beware of that. But yeah, with the right planning, you can put any kind of texture on there. If it's oh, maybe a button for an issue that's a little bit more of a gritty issue, funding for homeless. Maybe you want some, you could go out and take a picture of textures outside, rough sidewalk texture, or kind of a rusty or patina texture from an old building, perhaps, something along that line. And I'll go back to my fabric texture right now. And let's see, we had pulled back on opacity of that, and I had that to blend for luminosity. So I get all of my original blue color, and we'll talk about some more color issues in a moment. Let's see, so I'll click OK on that. Now on the text, I just used the type tool, and I had my foreground color set on white at the time. Let's see, let's set that back to white. Or, whatever you wanted your foreground color to be, just set that as your color, and then click on the image with the text tool and type something. So there it is. Now it comes in as the plain old color here at first, and you can tell I've put some effects on these others. So let me get rid of this layer that I just put in, And let's take a look at those effects. Now they're a little different. Vote and for, they have the same textures, or textures, the same effects rather. I'm going to take the effects off of for, and I'll show you on the word vote what we did. I double clicked on there, and when I use layer styles on type, it puts the style on just the type, of course. Now drop shadow, don't go in there alone. You know, drop shadow is easily abused, easily overused. Make sure that it reinforces the illusion or reinforces the communication of what you're doing. Same with any of these really, but drop shadow is the most easily abused. I thought inner shadow might be interesting since I had this this kind of fabric texture, and it's got shadows that indicate a little bit of depth. When I just put the white type over top of there, it didn't seem, you know, like it had quite the same oomph that my texture did. So I put a very slight inner shadow on there, very slight inner shadow. Now by default you get a black shadow with a lowered opacity, but I thought, you know, let's go get this blue. Since it's a blue button, I can pick up some of this dark blue here. Now that gave me the hue, and I thought, you know, I'd like, rather than this kind of grayed out shadow, I'd like maybe a little bit more pure color, but we're going to blacken it quite a bit so that it has some depth to it. And then you know, I played with the angle a little bit, and I'm using global light. Now global light means that it's going to apply the same angle to all my layers, which is very cool. So I get I don't get a conflict between my inner shadow on vote and my drop shadow on the word me, which is great. So I applied global light, and then of course you can change the size and the distance and so forth. Again, legibility is key when you're working with type. Legibility, very, very important. You know, if you trick it out like this, that word vote kind of goes away, which is the whole point. We want people to read the thing. So reinforce legibility, reinforce the illusion, reinforce the feeling and the statement that you're trying to make. Keep those things in mind with effects. I'll click OK. And these two words, vote for, kind of go together. It's kind of the same statement. So I can, if I'm happy with the effects on one type layer, I can option click on that and drag it over top of another layer. It keeps my effects on the old layer, copies them onto the new one. So that's great. These two words go together. They have the same effects. Very cool. Now for the word me, in this case, I've got a different set of effects. I've got a drop shadow and a bevel and emboss. So I can double click and we'll see both of those. And to see the individual effect, the controls on that individual effect, of course, just click on it. And same thing, I've got global light. It's got, should have that same angle. Is it 42 on the other one? And I've utilized the same blue. Now you can write down RGB values on these if you want to double check, or hexadecimal values, LAB values, any of those, and maintain that same color. You could kind of eyedropper for it, fish around, get a slightly different color if you want. Again, the main thing is reinforce that illusion, reinforce that communication. If your colors do that, then you're okay. If you're just messing around and grabbing colors at random just because, it may fall short. And again, adjusting all of these for, you know, to enhance the communication. Enhancing the communication of this is what we want to do. We don't want to, you know, trick things out just because we can. And then there's my drop shadow. Now that's got an angle of 59. Not sure why the global light thing didn't follow through. Oh, okay, there's the 59 degrees, and the altitude is 42. That's what it is. So the 59 degrees is staying true because I've selected use global light on all of these. It's important. I like having the light sources the same. It helps the believability of these projects. So there we go. That's the political button. If you wanted to get real tweaky with it, you could put a a pin out here at the end of a pin. Although most of these now have a little safety pin type of device in the back, or a magnet or something else. So that's not too much of an issue. If you wanted to put a background on here of a table surface and then create a shadow that reinforces the illusion of this being a three-dimensional button, that would be really great. That would be another way to enhance the illusion. So that's our quick tutorial on using type and layer effects, layer styles, and texture to create a political button. Thanks.